Phoenix City, Alabama. We misspell and mispronounce names all over the country. Hey, it's America. To us, it is Versailles and Cairo and New Madrid. Anyway, the story's not about that or the town we were in, Phoenix City, Alabama. It was about feeling dumb when I was expected to act smart. I was 15 in a hotel room with a bunch of con men, trying as best I could to be one of them. I didn't know how, so I just tried to look cool and know what was going on, even if I didn't. Phoenix City was a mobbed out, wide open town just across the Chattahoochee River from Fort Benning, Georgia. Open gambling, all-night clip joints, strip clubs and whorehouses. Something for the boys, anything actually. General George Patton had once threatened to bulldoze it down with his tanks, a notion I'm sure profoundly unpopular with his troops. I knew about these things in an abstract way. I'd never smoked a cigarette, had a drink, and sure hadn't been in one of those houses. I was just beginning to understand my fascination with girls and being wild, but not really engaged in anything beyond kissing Beverly Barker in the Garfield Theater in Indianapolis. We were in a large corner hotel suite on the third floor. The black bellhop had brought drinks and sandwiches and a big peach pie. It was summer and still hot. Maybe it was the spongy shirt. I was the only kid, and it seemed to me the only one not wearing a straw hat. They all had phony names. There was Big Al Hamilton and Little Al Smith, Bob Trout, Ernie High from New York, Harry Shalmeers, S. Clyde Williams, John R. Winfrey, my father, and me. I was still called Jimmy. They were all there to cut up the South. Let me explain. There was a sweet con working in the South, first employed by S. Clyde, whereby an employer paid a go-between big dollars to keep the union out. Not that anyone in that room had anything to do with the union. It could be very complex, but it was a gold mine with countless shafts. It was based on bigotry, fear, and that universal accoutrement of the rich, greed. Enter the con man. Pay me and we won't organize your Negroes. They used another word. What a deal. What a load off their backs. What a benevolent care of their people to help them not be forced into a union. The Lord works in mysterious ways his wonders to perform. They were all there to divide up territory. We'd been working Central Florida and the mining and manufacturing that went on there, medium-sized businesses run by self-made men. They were the best marks there were. They couldn't make mistakes. They were minor gods on their own minor turf, just trying to keep on top of their own minor world. John R. Winfrey could help. But now it had become so sweet that the grifters in the room had to not step on each other's deals. So after a long and sweaty afternoon of eating pie and listening to bullshit, the turf splitting began. Dad got Tennessee. The real plums, though, were the deep South states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. The unions of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, was feared and despised by Southern business owners. They were thought of as a combination of Yankees, communists, and the devil incarnate. Their way of life was being challenged just like in the Civil War, or as they called it, the war between the states. Why, if workers organized into unions, who knows? Who knows? They might even want to vote. These race-mixing Yankee unions must be kept out at all costs. Here's the scam. These con artists pick businesses that the unions weren't interested in anyway. All the cons put on phony Southern accents so as to seem like one of them. For some, though, it was impossible. Hell, as far as I know, Ernie had never been west of the Catskills. Here's how I remember these guys. I'll start with Ernie High. He's about 5'4", both ways. He had a neck bigger than my head, bigger than his too, and always wore tailor-made clothes. He had on a silk suit. He had on a little pencil-thin mustache and wore the biggest star sapphire pinky ring I have ever seen. He would ask how I was doing, and if he knew I was going to be there, would always bring a book for me. He later went to prison. Dad had worked with Harry Shalmers and S. Clyde Williams in Louisiana, where Dad had made his biggest score a few years before. It was the McElhaney brothers. They made Tabasco sauce on Avery Island, Louisiana. It was over 10 grand, and we were rich for a while. Anyway, Harry always had some new gorgeous young woman on his arm every time we saw him. He had on a wide-brimmed straw hat, a brown Hawaiian shirt with big red flowers on it, and was the only guy I had ever seen in sandals. He had a pronounced Chicago accent, the Bears, and was somehow always made uncomfortable by my presence. At least that's how it seemed to me. Perhaps it was because his girlfriend also thought I was cute. I was 15. She was cute too. Bob Trout was tall, thin, wore horn-rimmed glasses, a gray suit, and looked all business. It was deceiving. He had a way about him that would make you insist on buying your share of the Brooklyn Bridge. He got Georgia. Big Al and Little Al were a pair. They worked in tandem. Big Al had a kind of soft demeanor and gentleness to him. He must have been 6'3" and always deferred to Little Al. It was the early 50s, and even these wise guys couldn't figure them out. It was 20 years later before I did. Of course, they were a gay couple. They pulled the con together and were very good at it. They got Alabama, and now the story turns tragic. Big Al was deathly afraid of cops. He would take great pains to avoid uniformed officers. I don't know the whole story, but I believe it had something to do with his experience related to his sexual orientation. He came walking out of a hotel in Birmingham, Alabama in 1954. A policeman was standing there and Al started running, the officer in hot pursuit. He ordered him to halt, and when he didn't, he shot and killed Al Hamilton. Little Al Smith was from the Bronx and a foot shorter than Big Al, and until the untimely death of his partner always, so it seemed, used the imperial we. I know this seems contradictory, but he looked like a cross between a Hasidic rabbi and a Chihuahua. He wore fine clothes, and that day had on a beautiful blue silk t-shirt and a bright blue headband on his Panama. He smoked great big cigars, which, when he could get there on time, Big Al lit. I told him I thought his shirt was neat. He calmly got up, went in the next room, came out in a minute with another one on, and threw the blue silk at me. "Keep it, Jimmy, it's yours." No matter how uncomfortable I felt in the room with these dandies, I came out a winner. And now for S. Clyde Williams, or Stan Williams. There was a brilliance about him the like of which I have never seen. He was wearing a white linen suit with a lavender handkerchief exploding from its pocket. It was as if a spotlight beamed down on him. I had first met him in New Orleans in a tavern on Canal Street where shysters and cons hung out. That was back in 1946. He had once given me $5 to sing the second verse of the Star-Spangled Banner, which I did. Few people know it, so I was the phenomenon that day. Hey, I also knew the third verse, but he didn't ask me about that. He could see, though, that Glenn, my father's real name, was training his kid in the art of the sweet talk trade. S. Clyde was a legend among the people in the room. He, so the story goes, pulled this con on the kingfish, Huey P. Long himself, for big money. He was the prince of Flim Flam, at least for now. While we were eating the sandwiches, I said, "I'll bet you $1 I can say a word backwards quicker than you can." He replied, "You're on." I had worked this out just to get his money. The word was Constantinople. I had heard this done on the radio by a comedian named Professor Backwards. "We'll start on the count of 3, okay?" "Okay. 1, 2, 3, El Panasnasnak," he said, before I could get out the first syllable. He smiled condescendingly and said, "I'll give it back if you sing that second verse again." I looked around the room and they were all laughing at me. No way. I was older and wiser now. I sure wasn't going to humiliate myself even more in front of all these guys. "No, you keep it, Stan," I said. He glared at me. Didn't say it, but I know what it meant. It meant never call me that in public, and I never did again. As happens so often with con men, he was on top of the world one day and in desperate trouble the next. A few years later in Florida, I got up one morning and there he was, bedraggled, stuporous, unkempt, and hungover, sleeping on our couch. He had been rolled and was broke. He had on a suit that should have been thrown away. S. Clyde was Stan again, and he was silent in a world of his own. Dad gently got him up